Thank you, Chris Hassel. Yes, it is a massive collision of storylines, of narrative, of real greatness within this 2022 college football season. And joining us live from the scene in Athens is Dennis Dodd and Josh Pate. You got to hear from Dennis speaking with Kirby Smart just a little bit ago. Tom Fornelli joining as well. Gentlemen, before we get out of here, we are going to pick this game. But first, let's pick it apart. Let's look at all the different angles because the matchup is worth it. And let's begin with one of the most explosive offenses in the entire country, going up against a defense that, yes, this season has been one of the best in the country, but last season was historic, and the year before that, they were one of the best in the country. This Georgia defense is a standard of excellence. So looking at Tennessee's offense, going up against Georgia's defense, Dennis, what part of that matchup in particular stands out to you?
I want to see how Georgia's defense reacts. And the first thing that came to mind is those wide splits that Tennessee has, hearkening back to Mike Leach, hearkening back to Art Briles. We know about the tempo. They snap the ball about equal amount of time that it takes Josh here to do 225 10 times, 16.76 seconds. But I've got a theory here, and it goes all the way back to Super Bowl 36. If you remember that Rams-Patriots game where Bill Belichick told his secondary to mug them up. Take the rules, kick them off the cliff, see what you can get away with. And they did. They slowed down Isaac Bruce in that group. I think Kirby Smart's smart enough, at least when they go wide, to try to mug them up first, because the pro rule says you can't touch them after 5 yards. The college rule says you run a truck over them. It doesn't matter.
Do we know the college rules?
And Kirby, knowing Kirby, an old defensive back, I think he's going to try some of that tomorrow. And Alabama didn't do it. I don't know if anybody else has tried to take it on like that, but I think he's going to try to get really, really physical with the Tennessee receivers.
And the other thing to think about, you and I kind of spoke about this last week, is if we go back to spring, Chip and Tom, if we go back to summer and we were doing the preview, long-form previews on Georgia football, there weren't a ton of questions. Of course, we knew they had to replace a lot of defensive guys to the draft, but on defense, they had depth. We knew that. But that battle at two corner kept going on into fall camp. It kept going on. We know we got Keely Ringo. Who do we have over there? Well, it ends up being Kamari Lassiter. Okay, and then we look at the schedule and we ask ourselves, when are we really going to know if that's a weakness or not? And everyone knew. I mean, we didn't have to wait in September. You knew that this Tennessee game is really going to be the one where if there is weakness in the secondary, that's where it'll show. And this Tennessee team is so tailor-made offensively to put the kind of water pressure against your defensive dam that you haven't faced all year long. And they showed a crack. DeMarco Hellams at safety covering Jalen Hyatt in the Alabama-Tennessee game. It kind of can make your head spin a little bit when you think about the possibilities of what could or couldn't be there. The point is, sometimes it doesn't show up statistically until you face a team like Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup because, Dennis, as you were mentioning, they're running the Baylor offense in which they're spreading you out as far as they can, and they're making the secondary, the defensive backs, make decisions. And when they make the wrong decision, bang, it's there. Hendon Hooker does a terrific job of making the play, and it's a big touchdown. There's Jalen Hyatt running wide open down the field by himself. But the one thing about this Georgia secondary is they don't make mistakes. They are the best coach secondary in the country. So it's going to be interesting to see how that matchup works if Georgia can keep everything in front of them and force Tennessee to take the shorter throws on the way down the field. And then another thing that I think we have to focus on that there really hasn't been that much attention to paid for the obvious reasons of Hendon Hooker being a Heisman favorite and Tennessee being able to throw the ball all over the field. Kirby touched on this when talking to Dennis. Tennessee runs the ball really well. And the one key to this offense is, yes, they spread you out and they throw deep and they take shots, but it all comes off the run game. If Tennessee is able to run the ball, there is absolutely nothing a defense can do to stop them from scoring points and scoring a lot of them. If Georgia is able to take away the run, which other teams have not been able to do, and then allow its secondary to kind of just settle back in shell coverage and keep things in front of them, they will be able to slow it down better than anybody else has, and that's going to allow them to stay in this game and give them a good chance to win it.
Let me throw this in really quick. Georgia's numbers, if you look at them, I visited with Will Muschamp today briefly in the office. Their numbers are better than they were last year. I'm not saying the defense is better, but they're allowing fewer yards per game than they did last year. And the points per game is just about the same, 10.2 last year, 10.5 with a shutout this year. We know that. So I think this defense is almost, in a weird way, underrated. Because even without Jalen Carter, who's now back in the lineup, without Nolan Smith is going to be a big challenge. I think there's a big pride factor here for this Georgia defense.
Well, all defenses are benefited once you play South Carolina. It's just an automatic boost to your rankings, an automatic boost to your statistics. It is an enhancer in terms of the way you were viewed. But, Tom, I want to go back to something you said, because there is a Heisman angle to this. Like, Hendon Hooker has just recently become the new betting favorite, and C.J. Stroud had held that position since the beginning of the season. We've seen a little bit of separation there at the top where it almost looks as though it's a two-man race. Josh, Hendon Hooker's got more experience and more, he's older than some NFL starting quarterbacks. What is it about Hendon Hooker's play this year that you think has made him such a star in the sport?
Yeah, Southern Sean Clifford is what you were trying to say there. So just go ahead and say it. Southern Sean Clifford. It's a lot easier. It rolls off the tongue. That's about where the similarities end. That's about where the comparisons end. Hendon Hooker, you see that really, really fancy graphic that we have there showing his odds improvement in the Heisman market. Chip, I still think people doubted whether there was going to be carryover. He had that 31-3 touchdown to interception ratio last year. It was one of the most popular stats at SEC Media Days. When we interviewed him, though, we got him in our room, and he kept on using the term fluidity when we asked him, hey, what's the biggest differentiator this year versus last year? Why, theoretically, could this offense be better? And he kept talking about repetition. He kept talking about fluidity. He kept talking about how important it is to stack up reps in this offense. And it's not that they were bad last year. It's just while everyone else kind of marveled at the offensive success, they looked at it. We asked Cedric Tillman. He said the same thing. We look at it and we know there's a whole lot of meat left on the bone that we got to take advantage of and we got to make happen, because we don't want to just be a good story this year. We actually, even back at SEC Media Days, they were very forthright saying we think we can compete and win the East if we do our job.
Well, I'll make it real simple here. If C.J. Stroud and Ohio State win the Big Ten, C.J. Stroud's going to win the Heisman. If Hendon Hooker leads Tennessee to the SEC championship, he's going to win the Heisman. Now, both those things can happen, but I'm not sure if they will. So make your decision that way. As far as Hendon Hooker's development, quiet feet. Alabama was all over him. They only sacked him once in that game. Yeah. But he does not have happy feet. He has, guts. Guys that see that flush easily or move around in the pocket are intimidated by that stuff. He will stand in against the Georgia rush, which is going to have to be great because the Alabama rush was not in that game. If they pressure him, if they mug up those receivers, that does away a little bit with that tempo. But look, tempo, everybody runs tempo. Tennessee's is probably super tempo. I think Georgia's going to be used to it.
It's intelligence for me, which is what is separating Hendon Hooker from so many quarterbacks in the country, because we have to remember when he transferred to Tennessee, he did so when Jeremy Pruitt was still the coach. Josh Heupel was not the person he was transferring to play under, and this was not the offense he was meant to be in. Josh Heupel started with Joe Milton at quarterback last season. Hooker earned the starting job, and he had to learn an entire new offense, and we saw as he improved as the year went on, he was getting smarter and mastering the offense, and we enter this year with a full offseason of preparation, and he's completely mastered the playbook. He knows everything he's trying to do pre-snap. He knows what the defense is in. He can figure out where he's going before the ball is snapped. He's making his reads quickly. He's making quick decisions, and he's making accurate throws. And when he's doing that, there's really nothing you can do, because this is a very simple offense to learn, but he has mastered it and taken it to another level. And it's his ability that from going to the offense that he was playing in at Virginia Tech and he was expecting to play in at Tennessee under Jeremy Pruitt, and now learning this entirely new offense, just forget the Heisman. This gives me a lot of optimism about his ability at the next level, because he's showing an intelligence that I think you need that really separates all the talented quarterbacks at the NFL level compared to the guys who are actually good. And I think Hendon Hooker is showing that. And if I'm an NFL team looking at what he's done, that's a very appealing trait to me.
2016 Player of the Year in the state of North Carolina, prior to Dudley High School, Hendon Hooker's had himself quite a football career. What about the other quarterback, the one who has a national championship to his name? Of course, we were talking about Stetson Bennett. Now, his performance against Florida was not the best. He had 2 interceptions in that game. The completion percentage was right at 50%. And so, Dennis, I'll throw this to you first. Do you have confidence in this being a bounce-back spot for Bennett? And how much of this game are you going to put at his feet in terms of his responsibility?
No, I think he's going to bounce right back. I thought the Florida game, Georgia maybe lost interest for a while. It was 28-20 in the third quarter, and then they reeled it off. That's the old Stetson Bennett that we saw statistically. The new Stetson Bennett, who was the one since Game 3 when he took the starting job away, or got the starting job with JT Daniels, is the guy that is super efficient, doesn't throw many interceptions, doesn't turn it over now. Remember, it was his fumble that almost made Alabama national champions last year. He doesn't do that anymore. He had a bad game last week. They can flush it. There are ways to beat Tennessee, and the best way is their secondary is not very good. They were playing walk-ons back there at times. Their best defensive back is at Oklahoma. One of the guys, Key Lawrence, I think, transferred to Oklahoma. They're just not very good back there, which tells me that Georgia has to get pressure, get in his face, and then try to get something done. So, no, I think that's the weak point for this one.
Let's just let's play make-believe for a second. We do it off camera all the time anyway, so let's do it on camera. Let's pretend that Tennessee somehow, some way starts hot tomorrow, and they treat this game similarly to the first quarter of the Alabama game. We knew that Bryce Young was on the other side, so we knew somehow, some way, Bama's going to have a run. Boom, they did. 26-5 run is baked right there in the middle of that Tennessee win. A.D. Mitchell was so important for Georgia in the fourth quarter of that national title game last year. Stetson Bennett to A.D. Mitchell is one of the biggest plays, as it turns out, in the history of Georgia football because it secured them a national championship. A.D. Mitchell is not playing because he's hurt right now. They've been trying to stretch the field with the tight end position. And it works because you've got a stud in Brock Bowers. Darnell Washington's there, who is essentially an offensive tackle who wears a tight end's number. But historically, that's not the way you stretch the field vertically. And I wish I could simulate this in an alternate universe. What does it look like if Georgia gets down early? Because we can talk all we want to about the vulnerability of Tennessee's secondary. If you don't have the horses to take advantage of it, then that's just weakness on weakness, and sometimes that cancels out. So Georgia in come-from-behind catch-up mode. They did it against Missouri, but we could count on Missouri to sit still and wait on Georgia to catch up. I don't know if we can count on Tennessee to do the same thing.
Yeah, to continue that point, my firm opinion here is that this game will be won in the first quarter. If Tennessee gets off to a hot start and takes a lead, I'm with you, Josh. I don't know if Stetson Bennett is capable in this Georgia offense of digging themselves out of that hole unless their defense forces some turnovers and gets some touchdowns themselves. But as for Stetson itself, he was bad last week against Florida. You know what his worst game was last season? Florida. He barely completed 50% of his passes in that game, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. From that point on, he completed over 63% of his passes with 17 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, and he averaged over 9 yards per attempt. So I'm not too concerned about that performance last week. Like you said, Dennis, I think a lot of that was Georgia just kind of went to sleep in the third quarter because they figured it was a wrap and they wanted to focus on this game instead. But he's not going to put up the same kind of numbers that Hendon Hooker is going to put up because he's in a very different offense and he's a very different skill set than what Hendon Hooker has. But this is a Tennessee secondary that can be exposed. They are terrific against the run on the Tennessee defense. Against the pass, you can find holes, you can exploit it. I think Stetson's going to have a much better game this week than he did last.
Well, let's play make-believe, and let's go ahead and advance to post-game, and let's say that in the simulation it runs as many of the models have predicted, and Georgia does end up as the winner. Dennis, what does that mean for Tennessee's college football playoff host? Because they would lose the head-to-head tiebreaker against the Bulldogs, essentially be out of the running for the SEC East, unless you think that Georgia's going to go on to lose 2 games against Mississippi State and Kentucky before closing out its SEC schedule. Would a 1-loss Vols team still be in the running for the college football playoff? And what kind of hill would that be to climb for the Volunteers coming home?
Not that big a hill. First of all, I think the game has to be close. Maybe touchdown or less. They have to play well. And then I just go ahead and slot the CFP at the end of the year. You're going to have somebody from the SEC. So Alabama's not even in this argument. They're either going to be SEC champions or not in the playoffs. Same with Ole Miss. You've got Ohio State, Michigan are going to eliminate each other. One of those is going to be in, you would think. If Clemson is undefeated, and maybe if Clemson's even got 1 loss as an ACC champion, they're going to be in there as it looks right now. So there is a spot for Tennessee. Their competition would be a 1-loss USC, a 1-loss TCU or an undefeated TCU from the Big 12. The committee has shown an extreme habit of rewarding conference winners. But if all those teams have 1 loss, who are you going to pick? I think it'd be Tennessee. They're going to play their 6th-ranked team here tomorrow. I don't know if anybody else in the country's done that.
Yeah, the thing to think about here, it's such a make-believe is really fun because we could simulate both of these. A lot of people, myself included, think this may be a must-win for Georgia outside of a chaotic scenario because Georgia cannot stand there on any kind of table of any size at the end of the season and say, look at our resume other than this Tennessee loss. Tennessee can do that. And when you get into some of those Pac-12 champ or Big 12 champ versus 1-loss non-SEC champ scenarios, I think Oregon may be elevated above Georgia as a Pac-12 champ to the point where the head-to-head may not even factor in. It's only supposed to factor in if they're viewed as dead even. And ditto with an undefeated TCU. But if it's one or the other there against a one-loss Tennessee, and they have all of those ranked wins stacked up, that's when you could have the committee come in and with Alabama protocol essentially and say, yeah, you're a one-loss non-conference champ, but we see that resume, we respect it, we're going to view you as equal to these conference champs, and then it's just kind of, you just nudge them because they're in the SEC, and then we attend the semifinal game where Tennessee's playing someone they've already faced this year.
Yeah, I don't think a Tennessee loss would be the worst thing in the world for their playoff hopes. In fact, it might be beneficial to them because it could mean that they don't have to play Alabama again. And I really don't want to give Nick Saban 2 cracks at my offense. If he failed the first time, I can expect he's probably going to do a better job the second time. But I also don't think we should just assume Tennessee would still be a playoff team with a loss because, as you were talking about, Dennis, if you get like a one-loss Pac-12 champ, but you could also have an undefeated TCU, an undefeated Clemson, and then an undefeated Ohio State or Michigan, depending on which one of those came through the Big Ten. I don't think a one-loss non-SEC champion, even with a win over Alabama, will get in over any undefeated Power 5 conference champion. Now, the odds of all those teams finishing undefeated, we've covered the sport for a very long time. We know they're pretty slim. So in that sense, losing this game, as long as you don't get blown out, they're still going to be in the hunt for the college football playoff, and they probably still should be, because no matter what happens, honestly, at the end of the year, unless Tennessee loses 2 or 3 more times, it's going to be hard to convince me this isn't one of the best 4 teams in the country.
A game with stakes this high needs a whole segment for picks. Back here on the Cover 3 Takeover on CBS Sports HQ as we take a deeper dive into Tennessee at Georgia. Now, Georgia, for much of the Kirby Smart era, has held the upper hand in this game, and it's been, frankly, dominant. Hendon Hooker, of course, the new Heisman betting favorite, right in the spotlight going up against this stellar Georgia defense. And that Georgia defense, even though you lose 14 players to the NFL draft, still one of the best in the country. So let's do it. We've got a point spread where the home Georgia Bulldogs are favored, as we're picking it right now, by 8.5. We've got an over-under right around 65. Dennis, who do you think wins? Who do you think covers? How do you see this playing out?
I go back to the fact that Tennessee has scored, at least 30 every game this year. Now, you counter that. What did you tell me? Georgia has allowed less than 30 in 22 of the last 23. I think that's the number. I think 30 is the number, or 30-ish. First one to that, because I think Tennessee can get there with this offense. I also think Georgia can get there with this offense against Tennessee's defense. But I think Georgia is going to make enough stops and turn touchdowns into field goals, which will make it a 2 or 3 point game. I've got Georgia something like 28-26. Definitely take the under, but stay away from the points if you're betting.
I look at it and I think about how many guys Georgia lost to the draft. That's supposed to cost you, and it hadn't cost them in the form of a loss yet. But Tom mentioned something a little while ago. He talked about how disciplined Georgia's defense is. I'll second that, and I'll also say they're so much more aggressive and physical than other teams out there, and that's just a hallmark of great coaching. And they got like 15 former defensive coordinators here, so it should look like that. Having said that, I'm a believer Tennessee can score on anyone. I do believe Georgia's going to find a way to win the game very close, like Dennis said, but the points, especially 8.5 there, anything inside of the one possession margin you're giving me, I will take Tennessee plus the points and expect another classic here in the SEC.
I'm going to grab the points with Tennessee. In fact, I'm going to put some money on the money line as well. I think Tennessee wins this game outright. I think when it comes to this game, look, Tennessee plays basketball on grass. And you have to have a Bryce Young to keep up with Tennessee. Georgia doesn't have that guy. And while I love Stetson Bennett, I think he's vastly underrated. I think he took too much criticism last year and still does this year. He did make some bad decisions against Florida. And I think that'll cost him, because empty possessions against Florida doesn't get you beat. Empty possessions against Tennessee get you beat and might get you run out of your own building. I think Tennessee will have enough success to turn this into a shootout. Stetson Bennett makes a couple of mistakes, and Tennessee gets out of there with the biggest win in more than 2 decades.
You know, I promise I didn't wear this shirt to throw people off the scent, but I'm also on Tennessee plus 8.5. The way I view this game, the way it breaks down, I think that if Georgia's going to win, it's probably going to stay close. I don't know that they have the offensive firepower to pull away. Whereas, last year they did win the game 41-17, but I don't think last year's Tennessee defense was anywhere near as good as this year's is, particularly against the run. And I think they could do a better job of slowing Georgia down. Whereas I think if Tennessee is going to win, if either side is going to blow the other one out, I think Tennessee is more likely to do that than Georgia. So I don't know who's going to win, but I do think that it's going to be close at a minimum. So I'll take Tennessee plus the 8.5.
See, we got a Georgia win, but Tennessee covers. Georgia win, Tennessee covers. Tennessee wins outright. Don't know, but Tennessee covers. Drop that confetti! UNITY! UNITY! Yes! We are taking it! And yes! Josh was right on the money. There's just anything over a 7, a 7.5, an 8, an 8.5. If you are going to give me a possession, I'm going to take the best offense in the country. I'm going to take the best quarterback in the country because they are never going to go away. In all the different ways that you try to break this game down, there is not one result where Tennessee's offense is limited for 4 quarters. Take those points. Tennessee 34, Georgia 31. But plus the points is the way that we're going to go right there. Everybody here on Tennessee plus the points. I'm sure that's going to go spectacularly for all of us. And thank you to Dennis Dodd and Josh Pate for taking time out of their day to join us from Athens. And you can get more with Josh Pate with the Late Kick with Josh Pate, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays at 8 p.m. live on YouTube and on Facebook. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.